Hello and welcome to another episode of Autogefuhl, today with me AJ. On today's show I have the 992 generation Porsche 911 Turbo and I'm here at Hockenheim Ring. A great recipe for a lot of fun. Up front, again as always, this is a little bit wider now. In the front track it's grown by 42 millimeters and the rear track has grown by 10 millimeters. Up front, very iconic design now with these vertical fins right here in the front. At the lower part of the bumper, gives a nice flanking aerodynamic look to it. And as we know from the 992 generation, a square cut front bonnet. Porsche LED matrix system for these headlamps with these gorgeous kind of like lashes, these vertical slats here, ringed by this chrome as well. And again, a very sleek, low profile bonnet, again because there is no engine up here in the front. And overall, still maintains that traditional 911 Turbo look, but brings it up to the 992 generation of design. With the wider track, with the new generation of Turbo, the front is now 1.84 meters wide and the rear is 1.9 meters wide. As always, you have 20-inch wheels up front and 21 inches at the rear. This new generation also brings with it enhanced adaptive aerodynamics as well. There's also for the first time the sports exhaust pack as well as the sports chassis available, which lowers the chassis by 10 millimeters and has a much more stiffer suspension. You also have revamped brakes with these nice red color calipers, but overall it still retains that classic 911 silhouette, that coupe roofline as well. Carbon fiber roof, by the way, to reduce that weight. And again, flush door handles. Not really any design lines here, it's just all about smooth, elegant, curving lines. But you have a little bit of accentuations lower down with the side skirt. And of course, the intake for the engine, which is again, as we all know, here in the rear. The Turbo continues to have rear axle steering, and I also really like these chrome slats which are right on top of the engine bay here. Very typical Turbo wing, which is also part of that enhanced aerodynamics that we see, adaptive wing as well. A large central LED strip which connects the two rear lights, which again we've seen here before in the 992 generation as well, and Porsche stamped right below that with the 911 Turbo. And as we go down, again, you guys, like I mentioned, we do have the option of the sports exhaust, but here we have the more typical Turbo exhaust. But as you can tell, the outside casing is just cosmetic. The actual exhaust tips, albeit there are quad tips, so there's a dual tip on each side, they are nestled behind this outside casing. So as we all know, the engine in the 911 is in the back, which means you have a frunk. And the 911 Turbo continues to have a very usable frunk, which is very rectangular, has a lot of volume, so you can easily fit a couple overnight suitcases, a couple rucksacks, and let's not forget it's a 2+2 seater, which means the rear bench is also useful to drop in some bags. You also have gas charged struts, so the everyday sports car. Powering the 992 Turbo is a new 3.8 liter boxer 6-cylinder petrol turbocharged engine, which makes 580 PS, which is 40 PS more, that's metric horsepower, and 715 Newton meters, which is 40 Newton meters more. It does 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 2.8 seconds, which is also 0.2 seconds faster than before, with no overboost limit. So that means, if you guys remember, this Turbo makes the same amount of power and torque as the previous generation 911 Turbo S. It made it to a 8-speed PDK, which is the double clutch transmission, 4-wheel drive, and the VMAX is 320 kilometers per hour. Here we have the key fob, very sleek, and when you unlock the door handle pops out, and then, wow, pretty hefty door. And this is one of the things I like about Porsche. The weight of all of the systems, so the door, the buttons, the steering wheel, everything has a nice heavy built to last, high quality kind of feel to it, and this is the same as well. The materials on the door are also very high quality, very soft touch plush materials on the top. Well, it's not that difficult, but this is a 911. This is a sports car, so you have to stoop down a little bit. But once you're in, this is an impeccable driving position. The steering wheel and the instruments are the first things that grab your attention. They're so easy to read, they're so bright, and yes, the steering wheel has a nice grip to it. The materials on the dash are also fantastic. I also like the detailing in terms of this kind of shelf here with that textured pattern that we saw on the door is also on the top. A dash of chrome just below that. Everything has a nice weight, knurled finish. Everything makes a nice clicking sound. There's a good combination of buttons and touchscreen, which, by the way, this is a nice new 10.9-inch touchscreen. Maybe the one thing that I wish was a little bit different is perhaps maybe this gear shift lever, but we've seen this for quite a long time now already, and I guess it's up to all of us to make our peace with this. But a lot to talk about, so hop inside and let's go through them one by one. The first thing that you really notice is that beautiful tachometer right in the middle. All of the colors and the lights are so vivid and bright. It's I think one of the most well-executed instrument clusters. This is also a new talking point, and I honestly really like this system. You have, of course, the home menu where you can kind of personalize this page to have different widgets if you want to have navigation, telephony, your media, some basic things that you can always refer to. Then, of course, you have the map and media. You can connect your phone with Apple CarPlay, mind you, and not Android Auto at the moment. You can also configure, for example, the individual driving mode, and you can decide different things if you would like. But you also have certain apps that you can have. So this is a connected car, so you can have live weather updates and online search with Google. This also comes with a lot of assistance systems, including things like the Porsche Active Save. Again, you have toggle switches, really nicely weighted, makes a loud clicking sound, very satisfying to use. And even for the volume knob, you have, well, like I just said, an actual volume knob. And even to kind of toggle between the different settings. So if you go look back up here, and if I go back to this page, you can see that I can use this knob and it kind of switches between all of the different settings. There's a little red box that hops around. So if you really don't want to use the touchscreen, this also has a nice tactile click, nice knurled finish. So everything feels high quality, and this is a great way to have touchscreen as well as hard buttons. So let's talk a little bit about the steering wheel. First of all, the steering wheel can be adjusted electronically for height and reach. You have buttons and rollers, very minimalistic, and again, I think this is a very easy way to execute this. You have controls here for the volume, the voice recognition, and you have controls here to navigate and manipulate the menus on your two digital screens right in front of you. Let us put the new 911 Turbo through its paces out here on the Hockenheim Ring racetrack. I'm just coming past the start-stop line. It's a really wet track, and we're gonna take it easy, but at the same time try to understand what makes the new 911 Turbo one of the best sports cars ever. First and foremost, I put it into Sport Plus mode, so this gives me a stiffer suspension. It gives me much more faster reaction time with the PDK, and it gives me much better steering feel as well. Overall, the entire car, in terms of the engine response, from throttle pedal, also the all-wheel drive system, everything is adapted to be that much more faster and more responsive. The engine sounds really nice, even though we don't have the sport pack for the exhaust, the sports exhaust pack. So I would say you could skip that if you want to use this on a daily basis. But I think when you have such a glorious engine like that, it's always nice to be able to listen to it. on this wet track, that all-wheel drive really makes a huge difference, especially this car having the big engine out back behind the rear axle. It makes such a big difference. Steering is so great thanks to that rear axle steering as well. It just gives you so much more agility when you need it at slower speeds, at hairpins like that, but also keeps you planted at high-speed corners like this, where you just might lift off a little bit. It makes the car feel so much more planted. If I go into the manual mode, then I can take more control of the 8-speed PDK. Visibility in the coupe is really nice, especially out the front and the side, and the rear visibility is much better than that you get in the cabriolet, because the windshield is much longer. Performance is just blistering. Unfortunately, it's not the right conditions to be able to exploit that. Body is very well controlled. It is quite loud in terms of the road noise and the wind, but I feel really connected with the car. Active aerodynamics also doing its part to help me keep the car in shape. And because of this configuration of the engine and the drivetrain and the powertrain, the 911 Turbo is one of those cars that you can really steer just with the throttle input. So, of course, if you apply more throttle mid-corner, the car starts to go wide. But then you release that, the car tucks in so nicely, and you can get that traction out of the corner much better thanks to the rear engine, and here in this case with the four-wheel drive. Let's put the everyday sports car to the test and see if it really makes sense to have this as a daily driver. By the way, in the cabriolet that we're driving right now out here on the streets, it's not the coupe, so there's a little bit more sound that we hear, although Porsches always make really good soft tops, and they have a lot of sound deadening. They have a lot of stiff materials on the inside as well, so even though it's fabric on the top, there is a little bit more rigidity and sound insulation, but it's not as good as the coupe. The suspension, on the other hand, is actually fairly compliant and soft, and it, of course, is riding like a sports car, but if you don't have that sports chassis, which has much firmer springs and is lower, the standard Porsche adaptive suspension management system is actually quite a good compromise between comfort and ride handling. And the steering wheel gives you so much feedback. You can feel everything on the road. It's like running your face or your palm across the surface of the road. You can feel that. And even through the seats, I can feel all the minute undulations on the surface of the road. That four-wheel drive traction also means that on a wet surface like this, with leaves which are also making the surface of the road quite a lot more slippery, that all-wheel drive system will throw power to the front wheels to pull me out of a tricky situation. In the Sports and Sport Plus mode, the suspension is lowered, the spoiler is raised. So yes, it does feel a lot more stiff and bouncy and jiggly, but this is a 911. I mean, you wouldn't want it to be soft and wallowy. But again, thanks to that adaptive suspension management, if you go into normal mode, it is fairly comfortable, all things considered. But really, what you have at your right foot and at your disposal is not a throttle pedal, but it's a warp drive. It's a teleportation device. You put your foot down and boom, you're at the next corner. And then you attack that corner with this incredibly surgically precision engineered steering. It's like I'm making a fine cut through space and time. It's so much of precision. Even though the new turbo has grown, as it always does with each generation, it still isn't bulky. It doesn't feel like it's too wide for a road like this, which honestly is a very narrow road. And really great visibility, again, to look into that corner. You want to look as far into the street as you can. You can go faster, the higher you can make your line of sight. Let's summarize today's episode of the new 992 911 Turbo. Prices for the coupe start at 180,000 euros, and prices for the cabriolet start at 194,000 euros. But you add a few options, and near as makes no difference. These are both 200,000 cars. They are sports cars, but the Turbo and the Turbo S, of course, they're borderline supercars. So what do you get for this? Well, as always, the Turbo has been about performance, luxury, and usability. Performance-wise, 580 horsepower. I mean, you're really getting a Turbo S from the previous generation in terms of its figures. With that four-wheel drive, instant acceleration, pretty much, non-existent turbo lag, the performance is, you've got that covered. Trust me on that. And in terms of usability, well, you have a frunk rear axle steering, which makes it really compact in the city, even though, as always, the Turbo is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, still very manageable. The rear seats might not be great for anything other than having kids in the back, but it's good for having a couple, some space to throw in a backpack or a small suitcase. So usability as well covered. In terms of luxury, the interior, as always, has great build quality, great materials, a lot of new technology now, like the adaptive cruise control coupled with the lane keeping assist and the traffic sign recognition, all come together to make this a very semi-autonomous car for driving on the highways. So technology as well helps bring it to the modern age. So overall, if you have 200,000 euros and you like Porsches, the new 992 Turbo is definitely a no-brainer.